The profound irony is that the United States, once widely hailed as the world's arsenal of democracy, now stands as its largest debtor. It expends more to sustain its global empire than any previous empire in history, a vast enterprise financed by debt, sustained by collective belief, and shrewdly exported through its pervasive culture. War thus ceased to be a tragedy to be strenuously avoided. It became a product to be aggressively sold, and the world, willingly or not, became its indispensable customer. Yet, history invariably whispers a cautionary tale. Every empire that ultimately transformed war into its primary engine of profit eventually lost all control over the mounting costs. Ancient Athens, Imperial Spain, Victorian Britain, they all expanded at a pace their underlying economies simply could not sustain, until crushing debt, rampant inflation, and widespread disillusionment tore them irrevocably apart. The United States, in this historical context, is no different. Its national debt now surpasses an unfathomable $34 trillion. Its currency, once robustly backed by gold, is now implicitly underwritten by military might and fragile market confidence. But confidence, much like empires themselves, is not an eternal commodity. When the world eventually ceases to believe in the system, the machine will inevitably cease to function. So, what transpires when war no longer yields profitable returns? When trusted allies lose faith, when overwhelming debt stifles economic growth, when the dollar's supremacy falters, will the entire business model then collapse? And perhaps that is precisely where the tides of history are inexorably carrying us, to a point where the empire of war must confront the empire of debt. Both are profound creations of the same seductive illusion, that of infinite growth, for nothing, not even power, can expand forever. But there remains one final, critical layer to consider, the moral dimension. There's a haunting observation from the 1970s. It is dangerous to be America's enemy, but fatal to be its friend. Many allies have learned this bitter lesson. Nations that once hosted U.S. military bases or staunchly supported U.S. foreign policies frequently find themselves hopelessly entangled in conflicts that tragically outlast generations. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, each war ostensibly justified by lofty ideals, freedom, democracy, security. Yet, each has invariably left behind a legacy of chaos, staggering debt, and, ironically, undeniable profit. War, it appears, evolved into a repetitive pattern, designed not to be definitively won, but rather to be perpetually continued. However, let us step back and consider the broader perspective. This discussion is not intended to demonize a single nation. Instead, it aims to comprehend a profound global transformation. America did not invent the concept of war. What it did was industrialize it. It rendered warfare scalable, repeatable, and supremely profitable. The 20th century commenced with nations engaging in warfare primarily for territorial acquisition. It concluded with corporations effectively fighting for lucrative contracts. Today, even the very instruments of war have become privatized. Drones, cyber weapons, pervasive surveillance technologies, and sophisticated propaganda operations. And behind each of these lies a stock ticker, a meticulously prepared balance sheet, and a glowing shareholder report. War is no longer chaotic. It is meticulously organized revenue. So, what are the inevitable consequences when an empire is powered by perpetual conflict? We witness precisely what exists today. An economy dangerously addicted to tension, financial markets that invariably surge on fear, politicians who thrive amidst crisis, and a public carefully conditioned to equate militarism with an illusion of safety. It operates on the same fundamental logic as investing in roads or schools, but instead of constructing bridges, one manufactures bombs. The crucial distinction, however, is profound. Bombs do not create value. They irrevocably destroy it. And that destruction, to sustain the cycle, must be continually replaced. Thus, the system ingeniously perpetuates itself by ensuring that periods of peace never last long enough for its underlying motives to be genuinely questioned. By the time America eventually withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021, the world's longest war concluded, not with a decisive victory, but with substantial profit. The stock prices of defense contractors, remarkably, rose in the very week of the withdrawal. New deals were already being meticulously negotiated, not for the arduous task of reconstruction, but rather for the ominous prospect of the next confrontation. China, Russia, cyber warfare, space. The specific adversaries may change, but the core business model steadfastly remains. Every new enemy represents a fresh market opportunity. Every new technological advance becomes a new weapon to be deployed. Every war, whether genuinely real or carefully imagined, is simply another quarterly report waiting to be authored. But herein lies the profound paradox. The very system that so ingeniously transmuted war into a thriving business has, in turn, ensnared America within its own relentless machinery. To uphold its global dominance, the U.S. must engage in endless spending, not merely on active wars, but crucially on maintaining the perception of its formidable strength. The Pentagon, famously, cannot effectively audit its own books. Trillions of dollars routinely go missing, unaccounted for, every few years. And yet, Congress continues to approve new budgets without serious question. Why? Because in the corridors of Washington, peace, lamentably, possesses no influential lobby. Or does it? This mandated that every nation on Earth requiring oil first had to acquire U.S. dollars. And how does one effectively enforce such a profound global dependence? With the world's most formidable military, of course. Thus, the petrodollar system was born, a powerful, enduring marriage of financial might and military power. War, in this context, did not merely safeguard freedom, it meticulously protected demand. From the volatile Middle East to the tumultuous landscapes of Latin America, America's numerous wars, orchestrated coups, and strategic interventions frequently aligned with one overarching, deceptively simple objective: to maintain its global economic dominance. In 1953, Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh was overthrown shortly after he moved to nationalize the country's oil industry. In 2003, Iraq's Saddam Hussein met a similar fate after he proposed selling oil in euros rather than dollars. Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, before his nation was bombed into collapse, had been actively planning to launch a gold-backed African currency. Are these mere coincidences, or do they reveal a disturbing, consistent pattern? War, in this light, transcended being just a business. It evolved into a powerful brand, meticulously marketed under the banner of freedom and exported under the label of democracy. Yet, beneath these lofty slogans, the true objective invariably remained the control of vital resources, strategic markets, and prevailing global narratives. Economists refer to a concept known as military Keynesianism. This doctrine posits the use of substantial war spending as a deliberate form of economic stimulus. When consumer demand naturally weakens, the government strategically boosts military budgets, thereby generating jobs, securing lucrative contracts, and ultimately fostering a semblance of political stability. And every tactical withdrawal invariably created fresh opportunities for enhanced defense spending on surveillance, cybersecurity, and sophisticated drone technology. This is not mere speculation. It is verifiable accounting. Consider the case of Halliburton, a company once presided over by Vice President Dick Cheney. During the Iraq War, it secured over $39 billion in lucrative government contracts. Lockheed Martin, another titan, reaped billions from the F-35 fighter jet project, an aircraft so notoriously expensive and plagued by delays that some economists have dubbed it a $1.7 trillion venture that, fundamentally, doesn't work. Yet, this project continues to receive funding year after year, primarily because its existence supports thousands of jobs across 45 states, each one representing significant political leverage. No senator dares to propose cuts to defense spending when it directly threatens the livelihoods of their local constituents. Thus, the system cunningly perpetuates itself, remaining politically untouchable and economically indispensable. But a deeper, more profound truth underlies this intricate web. America's economy itself has become inextricably dependent on the mechanisms of war. The dollar's enduring global dominance, the stability of the bond market, and the very petrodollar system are all robustly reinforced by overwhelming global military power. Following the conclusion of World War II, the U.S. leveraged its unparalleled financial strength to anchor the burgeoning world economy. Through the pivotal Bretton Woods Agreement, it pegged other international currencies to the dollar, and the dollar, in turn, to gold. However, when President Nixon controversially ended the gold standard in 1971, the dollar urgently required a new, equally potent foundation. It discovered this new anchor in oil. The U.S. forged a critical agreement with Saudi Arabia, stipulating that oil would be priced exclusively in dollars. In essence, war, rather than peace, became the unexpected mother of innovation, not because a peaceful society couldn't achieve such breakthroughs, but because funding the generation of fear proved demonstrably easier than fostering pure scientific curiosity. However, any system constructed upon the bedrock of fear fundamentally requires identifiable enemies to justify its perpetual existence. Throughout the Cold War, that adversary was unequivocally the Soviet Union. When the USSR dramatically collapsed in 1991, the colossal war machine confronted an existential crisis. For the first time in half a century, America found itself without a formidable, great rival. Consequently, defense budgets declined, factory production lines decelerated, and stock prices experienced a temporary dip. For a fleeting moment, it genuinely appeared that peace might finally disrupt the entrenched cycle. Then came September 11, 2001. Overnight, the war machine rebooted with renewed vigor. Terror became the new, perfectly nebulous enemy, borderless, seemingly endless, and perfectly conducive to sustained profitability. Between 2001 and 2021, the United States poured over $8 trillion into the so-called War on Terror. These trillions flowed not solely to soldiers or specific military missions, but extensively to private contractors, consultants, tech companies, and even private armies. By 2010, the number of private contractors operating in Iraq and Afghanistan actually surpassed that of uniformed U.S. troops. These entities constructed military bases, trained indigenous forces, managed vast logistical networks, and effectively built the government on an hourly rate. War had, in essence, transformed into a continuous subscription service. Every bomb dropped generated corresponding invoices. Every destroyed building triggered a new reconstruction project. Let's examine the intricate mechanics of this system. Every war necessitates weapons. Every weapon demands intensive research and development, and every research project requires substantial funding. This funding, predominantly taxpayer money, flows not merely to the soldiers on the front lines, but primarily to gargantuan defense contractors. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics are not simply manufacturing arms. They are meticulously generating profits from the mere anticipation of future conflicts. In 2023, the United States alone allocated over $877 billion to its military, a staggering sum that exceeds the combined defense spending of the next 10 nations. China, Russia, India, the UK, and Japan, collectively, still cannot match America's immense defense budget. Why such an extraordinary disparity? Because warfare is no longer merely a reactive measure. It has evolved into a strategic investment. Consider this unsettling reality. Every time global tensions escalate, be it in Ukraine, Taiwan, or the Middle East, the stock prices for major defense companies invariably surge. When missiles are launched, financial markets paradoxically celebrate. Conversely, when peace talks show promise, those same markets experience a noticeable slump. This represents a grotesque inversion of morality, where destruction serves as the primary engine of prosperity. Furthermore, this phenomenon extends far beyond the direct manufacturing of weaponry. War spending permeates virtually every sector of society: infrastructure development, technological advancement, educational programs, and even the entertainment industry. The ubiquitous GPS technology in your smartphone, for instance, emerged directly from Cold War military funding. So too did the internet, microchips, satellites, and modern jet engines. But the war utterly transformed everything. It was not just a victory, it was a profound reinvention. Between 1941 and 1945, the U.S. government expended the modern equivalent of an astonishing $4 trillion on the war effort. This monumental sum did not merely procure armaments. It fundamentally forged and invigorated an entire economy. By the time peace eventually arrived, the military-industrial machine had grown so vast, so deeply entrenched, and so immensely profitable that it simply could not be allowed to cease. The factories desperately needed contracts, the workers required jobs, and the corporations demanded consistent market stimulation. Consequently, the government meticulously ensured that this crucial demand never truly vanished. In 1947, the Cold War commenced, ushering in a new paradigm of conflict, one seemingly engineered to endure indefinitely. Unlike the World Wars, the Cold War presented no conventional front lines. Its adversary was abstract, an invisible ideology, and its nature was perpetual. These were, in essence, the perfect conditions for a business model that thrived on fear and constant tension. It was during this very era that President Dwight Eisenhower, himself a distinguished five-star general, delivered a profound warning to America about a formidable force he had observed consolidating from within. In his seminal 1961 farewell address, he famously coined the phrase, the military-industrial complex, a powerful, symbiotic partnership between the government, the military apparatus, and private corporations. This was a formidable triangle of power where colossal war spending functioned as the indispensable fuel for sustained economic growth. Eisenhower, with prescient insight, understood it was already too late to halt its momentum. The machine had been irrevocably built. His sole hope was that the populace would recognize its insidious presence before it entirely consumed the very essence of the republic. It presents a curious paradox when one truly contemplates it. Historically, every empire waged wars to safeguard its territories, plunder riches, or consolidate its power. Yet, the United States embarked on a profoundly different trajectory. It masterfully transformed warfare itself into an intricate business model. This was no mere policy of national defense, but rather an elaborate system of perpetual profit, a self-sustaining cycle where every single conflict, every global crisis, and indeed, every bullet fired meticulously feeds the insatiable machine. Once this stark reality is perceived, it becomes impossible to unsee. Stay with me until the conclusion, for this discussion extends far beyond America's military engagements. It delves into how an empire honed the art of monetizing destruction, and how this very model now exerts an undeniable control over the entire global economy. When the cataclysmic Second World War drew to a close in 1945, vast swathes of the world lay in utter devastation. Illustrious cities such as Berlin, Tokyo, Warsaw, and London were reduced to mere rubble. Amidst this global wreckage, however, one nation stood remarkably untouched, emerging richer, stronger, and more industrially dominant than ever before, the United States of America. While Europe's factories lay in ruins and Japan's critical infrastructure had been obliterated, America's colossal war production lines continued to roar. Tanks, planes, ships, and an arsenal of weapons, all fabricated on a scale unprecedented in human civilization, kept churning out. And here lies the pivotal turning point. Instead of decommissioning these immense factories, the U.S. ingeniously discovered a novel method to keep them operational. Peace, it quickly became apparent, was decidedly bad for business. Prior to the war, America had largely been a reluctant global player. The enduring shadow of the Great Depression had fostered an inward-looking, isolationist foreign policy. Every bomb dropped, every drone strike launched, every invasion justified as a defensive measure is also a profound reflection of something much deeper, an underlying fear of decline. Empires that sense their twilight approaching often cling desperately to power by any available means. They fight not for further conquest, but for sheer continuation. And that, perhaps, is the quiet tragedy of the American age. A nation that forged its enduring greatness upon the twin pillars of innovation and freedom now finds itself sustaining its existence through perpetual conflict and insidious control. Perhaps, someday, it will heed Eisenhower's profound warning that a nation utterly obsessed with arms may eventually forget the fundamental purpose of peace. That prosperity painstakingly constructed upon the foundations of fear can never truly last. For war, even when meticulously packaged as a business, remains fundamentally war, and every business, without exception, eventually faces its ultimate reckoning. The markets will eventually cool. The debts will inevitably rise. And one day, the machine will finally stop. Not with a cataclysmic explosion, but with a profound, pervasive exhaustion. And when that moment arrives, the world will be compelled to remember what America once truly stood for. Not an empire built on war, but the enduring promise of peace. For the answers are not concealed in the veiled future. They are lucidly inscribed within the annals of the past.